I've seen a lot of tense cable news debates lately, but this Chris Cuomo segment got uncomfortable fast once Cenk Uygur completely rejected the idea that criticizing the Israeli government automatically makes someone anti-Semitic, and you could literally feel the panel losing control of the conversation in real time. Welcome back, everybody. Hit that subscribe button, comment where you're watching from, and let me know your thoughts, because this debate exposed a divide the mainstream media clearly doesn't know how to handle anymore. Chris Cuomo looked completely caught off guard after what started as a debate about anti-Semitism suddenly turned into a tense clash over Israel, Gaza, and U.S. funding for the war. Cuomo brought on Cenk Uygur and Geraldo Rivera to discuss controversial comments from Texas Democrat Maureen Galindo, but Cenk immediately pushed back on the idea that criticizing the Israeli government is the same thing as attacking Jewish people. Cenk argued that even many Jewish Americans oppose Israel's current government and said Americans have every right to question why billions of taxpayer dollars keep funding a war that growing numbers of people oppose. But the most awkward moment came when Cuomo abruptly cut Cenk off mid-sentence and rushed to commercial during a heated exchange. When the show returned, Cuomo appeared to shift into damage control mode while Cenk kept pressing the issue of unconditional U.S. support for Israel. I definitely have some thoughts. Let's get into it.
Is there a line between criticizing the Israeli government and being anti-Semitic? And if there is, and I would suggest there is, where is it? This progressive candidate in Texas, Maureen Galindo, she finished first in the Democratic primary, faces a runoff next week. Galindo posted that if she wins, she'll turn an ICE detention center into a prison for American Zionists and ICE officers. And it will also be a castration processing center for pedophiles, which will probably be most of the Zionists. Now, that is crazy talk. And most major Democrats who are asked about this condemn her, okay? But what is going on here? Today, Hunter Biden went on with Candace Owens, right? I mean, this is like fringe crazies unite. This is what our politics is becoming. And she has a history of what I would call demonstrably anti-Semitic speech. And they were talking about the line with Israel. And he was saying a lot of things that I guarantee you his father would not want to own. So let's discuss where this line is, okay? Two very capable commentators on this. Correspondent at large, Geraldo Rivera, and host of the Young Turks, Mr. Cenk Uygur. It's good to have you both. Cenk, it's good to see you, brother. It's been a minute. Let me just start with you. Cenk, as I say, most of the Democrats don't want to own what Galindo says. And I'm not saying that you say what she says. But where is the line for you between criticism of the state and criticism of the type of person?
Yeah, that's actually super easy. First of all, just to get her out of the way, she's actually being funded by a right-wing PAC. So be careful with people calling themselves Democrats and coming up with these crazy quotes. Okay, now the important question is, where do you draw the line? It's super easy. Don't say anything about Jewish people, but of course we get to say anything we want about the Israeli government. I mean, the Israeli government says, well, since we're a Jewish state, you're not allowed to criticize us. We'll call that anti-Semitic. Well, that's crazy. Saudi Arabia and Iran are theoretically Muslim states. Does that mean we can't criticize them and we're offending all Muslims if we do? No, of course not. That's absurd. Nobody gets special privileges. I think that unfortunately a lot of folks who support Israel have been taught their whole lives that the whole world hates Jewish people, and that's why they hate Israel. Israel doesn't do anything wrong. It's all the dirty, terrible, evil anti-Semites that are unfairly criticizing Israel. But no, we just saw them do a genocide with our own eyes. What do you mean I can't criticize that? Of course I can criticize that. And is it anti-Semitic to do so? Well, if it is, then tons of Jewish people are apparently anti-Semitic. Because did you know not only wonderful brave fighters like Dave Smith, Glenn Greenwald, Robert Greenwald, Gideon Levy from Israel, I can go on and that fight for peace. But on top of that, 63% of Jewish Americans in this country are against the current Israeli government. Are they all anti-Semites? Of course not.
Well, first of all, I think you got to separate the people who take this as an earnest issue and have done so over time and opportunists who like to play gotcha and debate as a sport just to raise a following. Cenk, I believe that it's a real issue for you. A lot of the guys you just named, I think, are part of the problem. I think they're opportunists. But Geraldo, how do you see this and how have you seen it change over time?
Well, first of all, I think that what this candidate Galindo said disqualifies her from ever being in public office. It was obscene and disgusting. She wants to herd Jews into a pen where they kept the refugees and the immigrants, and then they want to take their fingernails out and otherwise torture. Just disgusting, low-down, dirty crap that you wonder how was she raised? How could she really be so far off the beaten track that she? And this is the person who was leading to be the Democratic candidate This is what's wrong with the Democrats. Don't they vet these people? I mean, do they want to get slaughtered again? Bad word. Do they want to get soundly defeated in the next election by putting up people who have these far left leanings? I think it's really they have to really assess, look into their own hearts and say, what the hell is this? That this is this the best the Democrats can do? Really awful.
Well, look, the Democrats have disavowed. Cenk, I'll give you the last word. You're shaking your head. If she wins, she's the Democratic candidate. Then she represents the party.
So first of all, she said those quotes after the vote, so it's not like people saw that and then voted for her. Second of all, like I said, she's funded by a right-wing PAC, so this I don't believe this at all. And second of all,
she's a good Manchurian candidate.
No, hold on.
She's a Democrat.
Hold on. Wait, you guys are picking this random tiny little Democrat.
We'll be back right after the break.
She represents everyone. Wait, did you guys all call out Randy Fine the monstrous genocidal freak in Congress?
Cenk, give me the break. And then we'll come back and you can have the rest of your point. The computer's taking me off. We'll be right back. I'm back with Geraldo and Cenk's yappy ass, who almost got me taken off by the computer. Cenk, we do call out Randy Fine. And look, Democrats have funded extreme candidates on the right also for a weak opponent. But the party's got to own her if she wins. It's not just, oh, what about Randy Fine? Shouldn't the Democratic Party be better than what they oppose? Quickly.
Chris, first of all, you guys found this candidate like a week ago. No one has ever heard of her, whereas not a single Republican has condemned Randy Fine, who is set to murder every man, woman, and child in Gaza. So it's utterly unacceptable. Look, 60% of this country has a negative view of Israel. There's no reason why we should be funding a country the size of Papua New Guinea to the tune of $320 billion and $8 trillion worth of wars.
That's a different argument. That's a different argument, Cenk, and I'm here for it. Don't get me wrong. But I got to jump. I'm into Leland's show. Now he hates me too. Geraldo, I love you. Thank you. Cenk, I'm going to punch you in the nose, but not because of your argument, because of what you did to my timing.
What made this entire segment so revealing is that it accidentally exposed how unsustainable the mainstream media's framing around Israel has become, especially inside Democratic politics. Because for years now, establishment commentators have relied on a very specific tactic whenever criticism of the Israeli government starts gaining mainstream traction: blur the distinction between criticizing a government and attacking an ethnic or religious group. And what Cenk Uygur did on this panel, which clearly made both Chris Cuomo and Geraldo Rivera uncomfortable, was refuse to allow that conflation to go unchallenged. That's the real story here. Not the random fringe candidate that almost nobody had heard of before this segment aired. Not the manufactured panic that Democrats are supposedly being taken over by extremists because of one obscure race. The real issue is that public opinion in America is changing rapidly on Israel, Gaza, and unconditional U.S. military support, and establishment media figures are struggling to contain that shift. Because notice what happened throughout this discussion. Cenk repeatedly tried to center the actual policy debate. Why are Americans funding this? Why are U.S. taxpayers expected to bankroll endless war overseas while Americans struggle with healthcare, housing, wages, and debt at home? Why is criticism of the Israeli government treated differently from criticism of literally every other government on earth? And instead of fully engaging with those questions, the conversation kept getting dragged back toward outrage framing and guilt by association. That's important, because when people start losing debates on substance, they often retreat into policing tone, policing language, or trying to redefine criticism itself as dangerous. That's exactly what you see happening here. The establishment position increasingly depends on making the conversation about acceptable discourse, rather than about the actual bombs, deaths, destruction, and U.S. involvement in the conflict. And Cenk's point was devastatingly simple. If criticizing Saudi Arabia doesn't mean you hate Muslims, and criticizing America doesn't mean you hate Americans, then criticizing the Israeli government does not mean you hate Jewish people. That is not an extremist argument. That is basic political logic.
In fact, what's become increasingly difficult for establishment figures is that millions of Americans, including many Jewish Americans, now openly agree with that distinction. That's why the old media strategy doesn't work the way it used to. 20 years ago, a lot of networks could simply shut down criticism of Israel by implying bad motives. But social media, independent journalism, cell phone footage from Gaza, and nonstop exposure to the human cost of the war have fundamentally changed the information environment. People can see things for themselves now. And once people start seeing dead children, flattened neighborhoods, refugee camps being bombed, and humanitarian crises unfolding in real time, the conversation inevitably shifts away from abstract talking points and toward moral accountability. That's why establishment media increasingly sounds defensive whenever these conversations happen. They understand the public mood is moving. Even Cuomo's behavior reflected that tension. Because the weirdest part of this segment wasn't even the debate itself, it was the interruption. The abrupt commercial cut felt unnatural because it was unnatural. Cenk was in the middle of challenging the premise of the discussion, and suddenly Cuomo claimed the computer was forcing them off air. Whether intentional or not, the moment symbolized something larger. Mainstream media still seems deeply uncomfortable when criticism of Israel moves beyond carefully controlled boundaries. And viewers notice that. People notice when certain topics create visible tension on television in ways other foreign policy discussions simply do not. Nobody cuts to commercial in panic because someone criticizes France, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, or even the United States itself. But criticism of Israel still produces this uniquely defensive atmosphere in establishment media, where hosts suddenly become anxious about timing, tone, framing, and optics. That double standard is exactly why public distrust keeps growing.
Meanwhile, Geraldo Rivera's argument completely collapsed under scrutiny. His entire position depended on pretending that one fringe Democratic candidate somehow defines the future of the Democratic Party, while simultaneously ignoring the far more extreme rhetoric coming from Republicans about Gaza. Cenk immediately exposed that hypocrisy by bringing up figures like Randy Fine, who openly made horrific comments about Palestinians without facing meaningful condemnation from Republican leadership. That inconsistency matters because it reveals that this debate is often enforced selectively. When far-right Israeli officials or American conservatives use violent rhetoric about Palestinians, establishment outrage is usually muted, delayed, or heavily contextualized. But criticism directed toward the Israeli government itself is treated as uniquely dangerous. Over time, people start recognizing that imbalance and it damages credibility. And politically, Democrats are entering a moment where they can no longer avoid this issue. That's another reason this segment mattered. For years, Democratic leadership trying to maintain a balancing act expressed vague concern for Palestinian civilians while continuing to support nearly unlimited military aid and diplomatic cover for Israel. But the Democratic voter base, especially younger voters, has moved dramatically faster than the party establishment on this issue. That gap is becoming impossible to ignore. Young Democrats overwhelmingly support a ceasefire. They overwhelmingly oppose endless military escalation. They overwhelmingly reject unconditional funding. And many increasingly view the Netanyahu government as extremist, corrupt, and morally indefensible. Mainstream media panels like this are essentially attempts to slow that political shift down by reframing anti-war sentiment as politically dangerous or morally suspicious. But the problem for establishment figures is that voters increasingly trust what they're seeing with their own eyes more than what they're being told on television. And honestly, that's why Cenk's presence on panels like this creates so much tension.
Because regardless of whether people agree with him on everything, he refuses to play by the traditional rules of establishment cable news discourse. He doesn't politely dance around the core issue. He directly attacks the funding, directly attacks the policy, directly challenges the moral justification, and directly calls out media framing tactics in real time. That makes traditional hosts uncomfortable because the old model of controlled debate depends on everybody accepting certain invisible limits. Cenk keeps refusing to accept those limits. And the more public opinion shifts, the harder it becomes to marginalize those arguments as fringe. That's the larger political reality emerging here. The American public is exhausted by endless war. They're exhausted by blank checks overseas. They're exhausted by watching domestic problems ignored while billions flow into foreign conflicts. And they increasingly resent being told that questioning those priorities somehow makes them immoral. That frustration is not going away. If anything, it's accelerating. So while Cuomo and Geraldo tried to frame this conversation around the dangers of anti-Semitism inside Democratic politics, what the segment actually exposed was something very different. The growing panic inside establishment media over losing control of the Israel debate itself. Because once Americans fully separate criticism of a government from hatred of a people, the entire censorship framework surrounding this issue starts collapsing. And establishment figures know it.